Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and welcome guests. I was 13 years old. Somehow I had managed to walk up to the net and shake my opponent's hand. I just lost the first final I'd ever gotten to in a tournament in spectacular fashion. I grabbed my bags, ran to the car, my mom followed me, and we began the long drive home, during which I was inconsolable. I kept replaying the match in my head. Where did it go wrong? I should have beaten this kid. My opponent was a scrappy kid from India. His name was Anirban Dutta. I remember it because I ran into him several times after that, but that loss stuck with me more than any. I remember the match. I remember the point where it turned. I was actually leading 4-1 in the first set. And I began to think about the trophy that I was going to get, and whether it was going to be a big one or a small one. And my mind started to wander in all different places. The next thing I know, we have a long point. I decide, well, it's time to end the point. Let's get off the court and get this done with. And I missed badly. And I remember at that time looking over at my opponent, which is something you learn in tennis if you're playing competitive tennis. Never look your opponent in the eye. And I looked at his eye, and he looked at me. And at that point, I knew the match had changed. He had figured out how to beat me. So he proceeded to reel off 11 straight games. He beat me 6-4, 6-0 from that point on. And I was besides myself. Tennis is a tough game. It's 10% physical and 90% mental. And that is the truth. Because once you do the repetition and get your strokes together, then it becomes match play. And it becomes all mental. And I can't think of a tougher sport, maybe besides boxing, where you're one-on-one with your opponent and your thoughts. But even in boxing, you get to go to your corner and have your crew give you pep talks. In tennis, you're not allowed to receive coaching even if you have a coach during the match. So it's a game that wears on you mentally. Even the scoring system can be draconian. You could win 6-0 the first set, lose the second set 7-6. You've won 13 games, your opponent has won 7, and you're still at even. You're starting over playing in the third set. Mentally, it will wear on you if you let it. So, with that, I decided maybe I could draw some things that I've learned from my experience in the tennis court to help folks in real life, in the business world. And in preparing for this speech, I happened to Google my old friend Anirban Dutta and found out, no surprise to me, he's actually got a book out. It's called Winning Strategies. It's Secrets to Clinching Multi-Million-Dollar Deals. And he's actually did some correspondence with Forbes here. And there's my friend, and there was those eyes on the other side of the court, staring back at me. So I figure I'll share with you, with that inspiration, a couple lessons that tennis has taught me and how maybe it could apply it to business world or your regular world. One thing I learned that day is losses hurt more than winning feels good, and it hurts for longer. When you win a match, it feels good for a little while, but then you go on to the next and you think about your next opponent. When you lose at times, especially the way I did, it sticks with you, and sometimes you revert back to it at later points. I don't think you should be afraid of losing. I think you should learn from it. You should not necessarily embrace losing, but not be afraid of it and be able to step out there on the court again. I think when I lost that match, Anirban wasn't afraid of losing. Even though I was winning, he was not afraid of losing, and that made the difference mentally for him and where he was coming from. The second lesson I would say is that you've got to learn your weaknesses and try to protect against them the best you can. Try to improve them, but sometimes you just have certain weaknesses. For me, it's always been my backhand. I never learned how to hit a two-handed backhand, so I hit a one-handed backhand that at best can be a little off-kilter. So I try to get the ball back the best I can on my backhand, but what I did learn to do was to take 2 steps around my backhand and hit a forehand to the opposite side of the court. So I guarded my weakness. If I knew my opponent was going to go to my backhand, I learned to step around it and let him know that I have a way to protect my backhand. I do the same thing in business today when I'm meeting with a prospective client and so forth. I know that one of the first things that's probably going through their heads, a lot of folks that I deal with, they don't say it, but I'm younger compared to others in the business. So I go ahead and address that from the beginning. I go over my history, my track record, my credentials, my education, and try to address that from the beginning. And I'm always looking at things that might be other weaknesses or objections that aren't spoken, and try to address those. A third, something that I've learned through tennis is that sometimes, rather than fixating on the score, you just have to live the fight another day. We see this a lot in business today. People are reeling with their different businesses that have gone through the boom and the bust. And sometimes you look at your wealth and where you are today versus where you were, and you can get fixated on that to the point where it affects you mentally and it affects your ability to continue to build wealth in the future. I think you've got to someday take it one day at a time or 1 point at a time and just try to keep yourself in the game. I think that's when I played in Irvin, that's what he did. He just knew that if he could just keep me on the court longer, that I was going to lose it mentally, and it worked. So those are a couple lessons that I learned from the game of tennis, and one example of my first loss. It certainly wasn't my last, even if you know that you have all these tools mentally that you have to deal with. Sometimes it's just hard to overcome your own thoughts and mentally where you go, and you see that all the time in professional sports. But nonetheless, it's good to get out there and continue to try and learn from your mistakes and your losses. Thank you.